you we are in Hebrews chapter 10, 19 through 25, and that's where we've been the last couple of weeks, last 4 weeks actually. This is the 5th week that we'll finish it, and we've drawn attention to the fact that we are greatly blessed. First Peter is just an example of a blessing passage that tells us that praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he's given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. And it's just one of the many gifts that God has given to us. And it's good to remember that we are truly blessed beyond anything that we can comprehend. In Romans 8, it tells us, I've started with these couple of verses. If it sounds familiar, it's because I've mentioned these in past weeks as examples of God's blessing to us. In Romans 8, he says, if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? And that verse becomes sort of a catch-all for things, because it tells us that God wouldn't withhold anything that he thought that we needed. And so that we can reason out that he is giving to us what we need, he is caring for us, and we are as blessed could be. And this is, the scriptures are full of all the wonderful things that God has done for us. And so I have suggested that we are in fact spoiled. That is the nature of things. He's given us so much, but it's important that though we are spoiled, that we not be spoiled rotten. And of course, I'm quoting Ashley in that because her brothers would tell her that she was spoiled rotten, and she would affirm, no, I am spoiled, but I am not spoiled rotten. And so I stole that from her for this little series. And what we want to be talking about here is living in God's grace without taking it for granted, because the danger when you're blessed, when you are the recipient of grace, the things that can happen is we can take it for granted. We can forget that what it cost, and we can even think that we deserve it. And that's corrupting to us if we take it that way. That's not the way it's supposed to go. Instead, we are supposed to be continually overwhelmed by God's goodness and then be responding to it. And so here in the passage that we have been in Hebrews 10, and we're going to have the last little section of that, the last couple of verses today. He says, after he's gone through the book of Hebrews, throughout the book of Hebrews, the author is encouraging Jews who have come to faith in Christ not to give up their faith in Christ. It could be difficult, as you might imagine, to be turning against the community or going a different direction than the community that they had lived their whole lives in, because they had concluded that Jesus was the Messiah. And those that didn't think so thought that they were into a cult. And so that was difficult for them to hold on to that, and there was persecution. And in this and also, just in following Jesus, that things can pile up and you can start getting weary. You can start wondering whether this is the road you want to stay on. And the book of Hebrews is written to encourage them to hang in there. And so he says, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, it's a picture of the Old Testament temple, since the curtain has been torn, by a new and living way open for us through the curtain, that is his body. Jesus died, and when he did, the curtain in the temple that separated the Holy of Holies from the outer court was torn from top to bottom. We understand that to be God opening the way to the holy place. We're admitted into the Holy of Holies because of Jesus. Here it says, since we have confidence to enter, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God. Hebrews takes a few chapters to develop what a spectacular high priest Jesus is. Then it says, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart, with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And today, let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. This passage I point out every week. It's a since we have confidence to enter the most holy place, since we have a great high priest over the house of God, then since these things are true, Jesus has done wonderful things to open the door to God for us. And he is a wonderful high priest that is with us. He understands our weaknesses and is with us in all our struggles. He says, therefore, let us draw near to God in faith. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. And so today we're in that last verse where it says, let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, all the more as you see the day approaching. We're encouraged to consider how we can spur one another on to love and good deeds. We're encouraged not to stop meeting together. We're encouraged to encourage one another, and we are encouraged to do that all the more as we go through time. And so that's what this whole thing is about. I'm using the picture of a fire because, you know, the way that it's supposed to work for us in following the Lord and in our life together is that there's like we're feeding off of the life in one another. And we're able to be encouraged. When we're discouraged, somebody else is encouraging and be able to encourage us. When someone else is discouraged, we're able to encourage them. When it's easy for one, it'll be hard for another. We can weep with those who weep and celebrate and sing and praise God with those who are celebrating and singing and praising God, and help one another. That's the way that it's supposed to be. But it's kind of like a fire, because it in a good way. Sometimes being thrown in a fire isn't a good picture, but in this, it's a good picture. We want to be burning along with one another. The point of all of Hebrews and of this text that we've been in the last few weeks is not to let the fire die. He wants us to remember that Jesus has opened the door and he is with us. So draw near to God, hold on to your hope. And then the passage before us this morning is telling us to lean on one another in order to have the strength that we need to follow. Let us consider. You know, this word "consider" is it's the word to think or to reflect, to think about, and then it has a suffix or a prefix that's put on it that intensifies it in the original language, and it's telling us to think about it, to reflect, to give some attention to how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. That spurring one another on, it's an interesting word to use. If you were in New American Standard, it says provoke one another to love and good deeds. It's a real intense kind of a word. It's stronger than suggest. It's really saying he wants us to think about how we can encourage and strengthen and challenge one another toward love and good deeds. And so I want to suggest here at the beginning that if we're not going to let the fire die, and I'm going to keep using this fire picture because it works for me, is that we're supposed to follow the flame. And what I mean in that is that God is at work, and we're supposed to reflect on what's going on in the lives of people around us. It's very interesting in this passage that it doesn't say, pastors, think about how you should get the people in your church to grow. That's not what this passage is about. This passage is to all of us. It's saying that we all share a responsibility for the spiritual lives of one another. And it tells us that we should think about how we could be helping one another to grow. That's where this thing goes. I say follow the flame because you know, well, let me say what I'm saying it means here first, is consider how to help others pass on the love of Christ. He says, now think about it. Each one of you, consider how you can spur on, can provoke, can encourage, can challenge one another to love, that internal transformation of loving people and of doing good things. That's what he says, love and good works. And so he calls us to pay attention to how we can help one another in that way. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, and I was a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout. And of course, I still am an Eagle because it's like eternal security. Once an Eagle, always an Eagle. But one of the things that I learned when I was starting fires in the rain was that you had to follow the flame if you got one going. If you got the little twigs down there, you'd dig around under the logs and find the dry, whatever you could find, and cheat with some paper and stick it in there. And you'd light the paper and start those little twigs on it. And you'd have a way you thought this thing was going to go. But if the flame started going in a different direction, you would move all the little sticks over to where the flame was, because the flame was the thing that was important. And you wanted to make sure that you didn't miss the opportunity to get that fire going. And the way you would do it would be to notice, you'd start the fire, and then wherever that flame went, the draft would blow it one way or something else, and then you'd want to put the sticks wherever it was. You wouldn't just build the whole thing, light it, and hope it took off. You just wouldn't do that. You'd instead have to pay attention to where that flame was going. And what I'm suggesting is, I think God wants us to do that with one another. He actually wants us to be tuned in enough to what's going on in the people around us, so that we have some sense of where God might be working in their lives, so that we're paying attention to what we say to them, and whether that's something that encourages them or discourages them, whether it's something that moves them in a good direction or tends to move them in a direction that's not as helpful. I'm reminded, when I think of this, of a verse in Ephesians chapter 4. The Apostle Paul writes, he says, "Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths." It's funny, the picture, don't let it come out of your mouths. It's almost like you're supposed to be listening to what you're saying and grabbing anything that looks like it wouldn't be helpful. Don't let the deteriorating, the unwholesome word could be translated putrid or deteriorating. Don't let those words even come out. Instead, only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Isn't it remarkable? He goes, helpful, building them up, helpful according to their needs, and beneficial. He's just saying the same thing in various ways. He's saying when we talk to other people, and he's particularly talking in the context of Hebrews, talking about what we're saying to our fellow believers and whether we're helping one another to grow, is saying, pay attention to what you say, and is it something that will help them move further along? Is it something that might encourage them not to lose hope? Is it something that will cause them to potentially draw closer to the Lord? That's the thing that he wants from us. He wants us to think about it and to pay attention to the impact of the interaction between us and other believers. Similar verse in Colossians 4, again, the Apostle Paul, here he expands it to outsiders. He says, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders, make the most of every opportunity. He wants us to be engaging with people, thinking about what might be helpful for this person.
Something's wrong with your sound, Kevin.
Something's wrong with my sound? Can you hear me, Lulu?
I can hear you fine, Kevin.
I can hear you fine too.
Am I okay now, Beth?
It's like it's skipping in and out. It might be me, not you. I'll move my.
I guess it must be, because they say that they're okay at the moment. Thanks for saying it, though. I don't want to talk to myself. I've heard this already. But I've heard this sermon. It's not that much. No, that's not what I mean. It says that let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt. That means not too much, not too little, paying attention to what we're doing, so that we may know how to answer everyone. Some will translate this, know how to answer each one. The point of both of these verses, and what I'm suggesting is present in this follow the flame idea, is that we're supposed to be paying attention to others in terms of how we might be an encouragement to them, how we might help them to follow the Lord more effectively, how it might be of benefit, because we're really not designed to do this thing by ourselves. We're dependent, of course, on the Spirit, but we're also dependent on one another. And that requires intentionality on each one of our parts. And so I'm suggesting that God is at work in each one of our lives. And one of the things that we want to the best we can is to be as sensitive to that in some kind of a way. The people closest to us, we can pay closer attention to that. And we can recognize that God may have a role for us to play as an encourager. And even the people that we just cross paths with in the church and in life, the Lord wants us to pay attention to our own part in their life. Goes on, he says, so that's the verse. Consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. So I'm suggesting that we are not supposed to let the fire die. And the nature of a fire is it burns for a while and it needs some help. That's how they work. And that's how it is in our relationships with one another and the work of God transforming us. Moving on, he says, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. That he tells us here to follow the flame, and then I called it stoking the fire. Because as remarkable as it is, we actually need one another. We stoke the fire by staying connected with God's people. Now, God's people can be a pain sometimes. That's the way that it is. And I know, because I'm one of them, and I can be a pain. And so it can be, there's struggles and tensions and irritations and all those kind of things that happen between Christians, or we're just busy and we're not paying attention. But this passage is telling us that as we're trying to keep the fire going, as we're trying to respond to the wonderful opportunity of knowing God better and of living with Jesus, he says it's important that we stay connected with one another. We, of course, have gone to these extraordinary means during this this pandemic. We can't meet, and so when we haven't met, then we do this thing online. But here's a picture of a fire, and you notice when you've got the fire going, and the pieces of wood are appropriate distances apart, so you get draft and you get the heat, and you get the wood, then it all burns. But I don't know how it was for you, but certainly for me as a kid, one of the fun things, if you're camping around the campfire, I don't know, all of you haven't done that, but many of you have, that when you camp around the campfire or sitting there, and what you want to do is you want to pull one of those sticks out. You kind of pull that stick out. Dads are always trying to get the kid to put the stick back in the fire so they don't burn the forest down. But you pull that stick out. But you know what happens when you pull that stick out? It'll flame for a minute. It'll flame for a minute, and then it goes out. That's what it does. And if you want to get that thing flaming again, you got to put it back in the fire, because that's how it is. And following Jesus has some of those characteristics of it. The having other people who are trying to follow Jesus that we gather with, other people who can encourage us down that road, that's an important piece of it. And if we don't have some kind of connection with other people that are trying to follow the Lord, it becomes so easy for us just to adopt the mindset of the world. Then we just start thinking like, well, really there isn't anything to anything and nothing really matters, and we can become kind of cynical like all the other messes out there. I just wanted to suggest that the application of this is to take advantage of the opportunities that are offered. You got to find a connection that works for you, of course, but that opportunities that are offered, if we don't step into those, then we find it more difficult to maintain the path. It's always easier to keep something going if you're trying to do it with some other people. It's harder in the sense that people are a pain, but it's helpful because then someone else can kind of keep us accountable in some way. I don't mean that in a heavy-handed way, but I mean it just we can encourage one another. It also can take some individual initiative. If you're within a congregation, for us to be able to stay connected, that takes some effort on each person's part. It takes some kind of reaching out themselves. I mean, you can just think about it. If somebody comes to mind, maybe it's a good idea to send them a text. You can just say, I was thinking about you, thought I'd tell you. That's good enough. That's something. Could be a little weird. Terry doesn't send me those a lot, and it's good. I'd feel a little funny if he was sending them to me every day. I don't want him thinking about me that much. But the just letting people know that they're on your heart, that you care about them. If there's something you're praying for them, it might be good to let them know. Something that can be an encouragement in that way. If there's something somebody's done and you appreciated it, something you admired about something somebody did, any place you can catch them being good. We had that game going. I think it was in Awana. We'd wait for an opportunity. If you saw somebody doing something that was encouraging a kid to another, then you'd give them a sticker because you caught them being good. And that's more effective than browbeating them to get them to do it, because they won't really do that. But if you can find something to encourage, that can be helpful, because we actually need all that stuff. Any form of contact is good. because it just opens the door so that we stay together. And this requires more intentionality in this present time for folks to stay connected in any way, just because you're pushed apart in so many ways, and we don't have the downtime that would happen. Stoke the fire. Stay connected with God's people. That's the second piece of this thing. Don't let the fire die. Follow the flame. Excuse me. Stoke the fire. Following the flame, emphasizing, noticing what others need, and stoking the fire, reminding us we want to stay connected. Last piece, but encouraging one another. Let us consider how we can spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Don't become disconnected, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Consider how we can encourage one, or can push one another on in a good direction, can be a positive influence in each other's lives. Staying connected, encouraging one another, and keeping at it. Follow the flame, stoke the fire, keep fanning the flame, to use my little fire illustration one more time. We'll beat it to death. Is you keep fanning the flame. And what I want to suggest this is to offer to others the fresh air of encouragement. You know, a word of encouragement can go a long ways. Noticing something somebody did, expressing some sort of a positive response to something, anything in that way can lift people up. You know, I was thinking about this, and I noticed a couple things I saw online where somebody had posted. A couple of folks on Facebook that I'm not going to give their names or anything, it was just a posting, but where they were just acknowledging how somebody had said something positive to them and how it really lifted them and encouraged them. It's that random act of kindness kind of things, you know, that can be really helpful, and it requires a little bit of energy and intentionality, fanning the flame. When I was a kid, it had never occurred to me that there were any other methods to do this other than blowing on the fire. That was, you know, we'd get down there and blow on the fire. As I was looking at this, I realized that you can buy bellows. You know, you can buy old school bellows to blow on the fire, because you get that air on there and it works. You can get a crank bellows. I didn't know that, but there they are. And I wish I would have had one of these. I could have avoided singeing a lot of facial hair if I would have had one of these things. You know, you just your little poker. If it's a hollow one, you can blow right there into the fire. It's really important on a fire, because the little bit extra oxygen at the right time, and the whole thing bursts into flames. Sometimes you get a bunch of wood on the thing, and if you don't give it enough oxygen, you can put the fire out with the wood, if you don't have that. And I'm just suggesting that in this context, that is what he's calling us to is to be that kind of encouragement to one another, with the intentionality, because it's interesting. The first thing in these three that he says of you know, how do we respond to the goodness, to Jesus opening the door to the Father? How do we respond to having Jesus with us all the time? He says, draw near to God. This is personally what you do for your own spiritual life. And then it says, and hang on to the hope. And this is more, you know, you're gonna continue to hang on. But this third one is saying, oh, and help each other, because you're going to need one another's help. And that's what he's talking about here. And then he says, and keep doing it. That's where he goes in the verse. I'm just giving you another verse where you have this keep doing it idea. It says in 1 Thess 4, now about the love, Paul loved the Thessalonians. He thought when he left the Thessalonian church that he was going to come back and find out they were dead. In fact, he didn't come back. He was gone and was worried the whole time, waiting to hear, because they were under persecution. He, in fact, had been stoned there, left for dead before he got out of town. But so he was worried about them. And then he got news that they had faithfully pressed on. And so he's excited about them. But he sends them a letter and says, now about your love for one another, we don't need to write to you. For you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all God's family throughout Macedonia. Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more. And it's that kind of an encouragement that he gives them that we're also getting in this Hebrews passage, where he ends up saying that we are to, I was going to say, before I get to that that he's encouraging us to keep on encouraging one another until Jesus comes back. That's why he says it. And do so more and more, he says, as you see the day approaching, which is a way to say as you go through your life and you're getting closer to the end of your life or Jesus coming back, that as you go through it, more and more, bring encouragement to one another. Give you a couple of metaphors. Entropy, of course, is it thermodynamics, physics? I don't know. That's the principle that says everything moves from a state of order to disorder. Things get less and less ordered as time goes on. It's basically garage maintenance. You know this. You don't even have to go in your garage, and it deteriorates over time. I always thought mine was possessed, because I go in there and the tools are not where I left them, but they of course are. They're where I forgot that I left them. But anyway, things deteriorate. That's what happens. And this is true of all systems. All systems, they start to fall apart. And it's true of a little fire. That's what happens in a fire. It starts burning, and then the conditions change as the logs burn. You don't move stuff around and add some wood and blow on it and different things periodically. It's going to die. You just leave it alone, it'll die, because it deteriorates. This is true of a system within a church, an individual church, is that if there's no intentional introduction of encouragement, if there's no meaningful trying to connect, if we're not reaching out to each other, then it just kind of slows down. That's the thing that happens. So we don't want that to happen. The positive side is synergy, and that's where you got the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And there can be stuff going on more because of the fact that there's various ones of us, and we can have a positive impact on others, and we end up in a better place. But it requires consistency, because if we don't continually return to being connected, continually return to thinking about how we can help someone else to move further along in their walk with God, if we're not continually thinking of how to encourage, well, then you get entropy, you don't get your synergy, and it kind of deteriorates. I'm just about done. Keep fanning the flame. Offer to others the fresh air of encouragement. It's the oxygen. It can be life. Something that can offset some burnout for folks or some discouragement or weariness is just knowing that somebody else understands a little bit, cares, can help out when that's what they need. But just knowing that folks are there matters. You're not wired to be able to do this thing on your own. It's all supposed to require us to have one another. We just require one another to keep us coming back. So don't let the fire die. Follow the flame, which I've suggested is pay attention to what the Spirit is doing so that we can join with the Spirit in helping others. Because you don't just have your own agenda for everybody. That doesn't work. Most people don't appreciate your agenda for them. But if you can discern where they're headed in some kind of a way and be helpful, that would be good. Just creating the space, giving some freedom, whatever. Stoke the fire. This is the recognition that we need one another. And keep fanning the flame. Encourage, encourage, encourage. No one has ever received too much encouragement. It just doesn't happen. I only had one prof in seminary that always said such nice things that he had encouragement inflation, but there aren't very many people of that nature. Most everybody, if you got another word from them, it wouldn't feel bad. Since we have confidence to enter the most holy place, since we have such a great high priest, and so it's because Jesus has done wonderful things and because Jesus is with us and is wonderful. Let us draw near to God in faith, hold unswervingly to our hope, and consider how we can encourage one another toward love and good deeds. This whole thing is taking this passage I've suggested, what we're talking about is, yes, we are spoiled rotten, and living aware of the fact that Jesus has done marvelous things for us. God has blessed us beyond all comprehension. But we're not spoiled rotten. I said it wrong. We're spoiled, but we're not spoiled rotten. Don't be spoiled rotten. Don't be going there. It's not what I meant. Fix that. Living in God's grace without taking it for granted, because taking it for granted makes us into spoiled rotten children, and then we forget what it cost to open these doors for us, and we think that we deserve it. And both of those make us not good. We want instead to stay in that grateful, thankful place of gratitude.